I started a new job as an overnight security guard at a private cemetery. The previous guard gave me a list of rules which I can't comprehend. Here is my story. Hello everyone, my name is Henry, and I recently graduated college for graphic design. While I was waiting and applying for jobs, I took up a job that was advertised in our local grocery store for an overnight security guard at a private cemetery near the town's border. I called the number, spoke with a woman who gave me very brief details. What surprised me was the pay, $30 an hour for a 10-hour shift. At this point in my life, I needed the cash to scrape by before I landed something in my field. The woman told me to be there by 7 p.m., where my 10-hour shift would start at that time. I pulled into the cemetery, which was about a 25-minute drive from my house, through a narrow dirt road. The outskirts of town were less developed than where my house was. The trees were thick and dense. It darkened quickly here. Further down the road, narrowly avoiding potholes, I approached a rusty old gate covered in hanging moss. I drove through the open gate, going deeper into the wooded area, darkness circling in on me. The graves began to pop up one by one, big ones, tall ones, broken ones, immaculate sculpted ones. They littered the open field where I could see as far in as the trees would allow. With nightfall approaching, I hated to say it, but I was already getting the creeps. The road stretched long and windy. I was instructed by the woman to follow the path till I reached a tiny hut, hard to miss. Soon, I made it to the tiny hut in the middle of the cemetery. It was dimly lit with a janky roof. Inside, a security guard popped his head up from the desk, looking like he must have nodded off for a few hours. I parked my car along what appeared to be his. He met me outside as I exited my car. The evening air was getting crisp. I felt goosebumps along my arms and neck. The middle-aged guard greeted me. He looked tired, heavy bags on both eyes. We exchanged brief greetings while he hastily made his way to his car. Before he got in, he turned back towards me, his eyes a little more awake and alert than before. He looked at me and asked, "Wait, you're not new, are you?" I looked back a little puzzled. "Yeah, today's my first night." A little uneasy. "Fuck, all right, take this," the man replied. He handed me a laminated piece of paper from his backpack. As I took it, I noticed his hands seemed a little shaky. "Are you okay, man?" I asked him. Again, he looked at me, alert, almost scared. "Just read that guy and stick by them. We can't afford to lose another one," he calmly spoke, a tiny crack in his voice. "Lost another one?" I questioned. "Like I said, guy, follow the rules and stay safe out here." The man got in his car and sped off. Its tires are peeling, rustling the dirt from the road. I stood there pretty weirded out, grabbed my backpack and laminated paper, and headed inside the hut. The hut was lit by a single low-hanging lamp. I nearly smacked my head on it. There was a rickety-looking stool, an old wooden desk where an even older ham radio sat next to an ashtray. I placed my bag on the table and got as comfortable as I could. It was sitting there at that moment when I noticed how quiet it was. While there's trees and wildlife in my part of town, this was more remote. I had figured there'd be more wildlife out here, but nothing. Quiet, not even a cricket. Quiet and cold, yet not a single light I could see out in the distance. The hut was smack in the middle of this private circular cemetery. The owner lived on the hill up the road. What I found out was, in the winter, when the trees are dead, and you could see further through them, you can see the mansion the owner lives in. And if you are lucky, you can watch him stare down at the cemetery. While it was not winter, I was surrounded by darkness. The hut barely lit up the area around me. A few feet in each direction of the hut was an unmarked grave, old-looking, all bent out of shape. While I scanned my limited horizon, I nearly jumped out of my skin when the ham radio began to go off. Static creaked to life, and a faint voice broke through. I fumbled around with the receiver when a woman's voice came through clear. I recognized her voice as the one I spoke to earlier. She was stoic and not very forgiving. Before I could answer, she said, "Read the instructions and do not stray from them. If you do not have the paper or lose it, text me and I will send you a picture of it. Your life may depend on it. Your shift will end in 10 hours, where you will be relieved of your duties then. Good night." Just as quickly as she came through, her end clicked out. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. 2 months' pay in advance has been wired to your bank account. My phone buzzed again, an email from my bank for a recent deposit. I stared wide-eyed at the large deposit I had just received. This job had to be too good to be true. While I ruminate over my phone, my attention was cut short by a rock thrown at the hut's window. My head shot up, nothing but the few graves around me. Weird. Back to my phone, scrolled through some emails, checked my account once or twice more. Then again, clank, something hit the glass. I stared at the empty darkness around me. I couldn't see further out than 10 feet in either direction. My stomach was beginning to get a little uneasy at this point, and the woman's warning was beginning to creep back into my head. Why would my life depend on it? Harder and harder, I ruminate over her warning. While I stared into the cemetery, something caught my attention in my peripherals. Something running, something quick, dashed into the darkness, quiet. My heart was beginning to race. The darkness was playing tricks on me. That's when I saw the laminated paper. Shakily, I held the paper up. It was a badly wrinkled and browning. It was headed with the cemetery's address, which I will not say, but under the address, listed rules, numbered 1 to 10. Number 1, do not investigate any ringing bells, no matter how close they sound, they aren't. Number 2, if bugs start landing on the hut's glass window, burn the candles that are under the desk till your shift's end. Number 3, if pebbles are thrown at the hut's glass, turn the light off and hide under the desk till the laughing stops. Number 4, if gravestones begin to appear and reappear, go outside and pour oil over them. Oil located under the desk. Number 5, if a gravedigger comes, do not approach him. Let him come to the window. He will stare at you for a few hours, but will leave after. Do not go outside while he is here. Number 6, do not venture out past the great angel grave under any circumstance. Number 7, do not answer anyone talking from the ham radio, except for the initial call when you came in. Number 8, lock the hut after each time you step outside. Number 9, do not leave the bathroom for more than 10 minutes at a time. If you have to, come back, wait, then go back. Number 10, if at any point you return to the hut and see someone else sitting in the hut, get in your car and drive off. I placed the paper down, still trying to process everything that was happening. Who wrote this? Why do I need to follow them? Is this some kind of joke? While I ruminate over my endless thoughts, something clanked against the glass window. Wait a second, I thought. I just read this. If pebbles are thrown at the hut's glass, turn the light off and hide under the desk till the laughing stops. Fuck. I dived for the light switch, clicked it off, and raced under the desk. The hut was cold. I was starting to see my breath now. I zipped my hoodie up and tried to keep my heart from beating out of my chest. Again a pebble hit the glass, again and again, each time my stomach stinking. Then came the laughing. A faint little girl laughed coming from outside the hut. I closed my mouth, trying not to make a sound. Louder and louder the girl's laugh grew till I thought it was in my head. The pebbles came harder. The girl's laugh lasted about 30 minutes. While it went quiet, I peeked my head from under the desk. It was still. A light fog was hovering among the field, with the moon's glow illuminating the area. I saw nothing. Quietness. I waited in the darkness of the hut for the remainder of the night. The sun began to come up and my nerves calmed a bit. In the morning I was able to see more out into the vast cemetery. Soon the car from before pulled up. The man I met when I started got out and asked for the paper. Before I could say anything, he looked up, groggy eyes, and said, "You're lucky you don't have the morning rules." He walked away, nodded, and closed himself into the hut. That was a long drive home. Lots to think about. I climbed into bed and desperately tried to sleep. My second shift was about to start later that evening. After my first night, I went home and slept about 30 minutes. So many thoughts were racing through my head. I knew what I heard. There was no mistaking the laughing. While I vaguely believe in the paranormal, I know what I heard. I looked over the list a few more times when I was home, each time sounding crazier than the last. I looked up the cemetery online and found little information about it. Everything about this place sounded like a mystery. As the day winded down, I barely realized that I hadn't slept much since getting back from my first shift, and I was 8 coffees deep. Tonight was going to be a long night. I packed my backpack, brought some snacks, and headed out. Like before, the narrow dirt path was empty as the sun began to settle behind the treetops. Ravens cawed and flew overhead as I descended deeper into the woods towards the cemetery. I approached the familiar steel gate. Ravens rested on top of the sharp-studded spikes that lined the length of the rusty gate. While I pulled into the cemetery, I noticed it wasn't as quiet as the other night. No, I was hearing something, sirens. I drove along the winding path where my view of the hut was obscured by a dozen of police cars and ambulances. I froze, panicking in my car. A cold sweat was running down my neck as I watched two paramedics wheel out a large black bag. Besides the hut was the same car that was here yesterday, except its front window was caved in like someone threw a bowling ball through it. I only figured the red had to be blood. The paramedics wheeled out what appeared to be a body bag. My mind was racing while I tried to swallow the dry lump in my throat. I nearly jumped out of my skin when a nearby officer tapped his baton on my window. He motioned for me to roll down my windows. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking. "Sir, if you do not work here, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the officer sternly asked. I shakily responded, I do work here. What is going on?" wiping my clay hands against my pant legs. "Sir, there has been an accident here. Tell me now. Do you know this gentleman?" The officer handed me a picture of the morning security guard. He looked tired in the picture like he did the other night. Again, I thought he must not get enough sleep. My mind flashed back to the minutes of sleep I racked up in the previous 2 days. "Yes, I do. Is that him over there?" pointing towards the body bag that was being wheeled into the ambulance. "It is son. Like I said, there had been an accident. Did you happen to have any ongoing contact with him? Robert, I think his name was?" the cop asked, leaning more into my car, his eyes scanning the back of my seats. "No, I barely spoke to him. Yesterday was my first day on the job. He is supposed to relieve me of my shift in the morning while I do him for the evening." I shakily replied, my voice cracking a bit. The cop fumbled in his pocket. His suit was pressed sharply, and his muscles bulged from his arms. "Son, why don't you take my card? We may have some more questions for you in a bit. You said you relieve him of his shift in the evening. I'm assuming you're here in front of me now, about to do just that. While I can't say exactly what, I will suggest that you be careful tonight, son. I ain't never seen anything like what happened to that boy in years." If I wasn't already on the verge of shitting my pants, what he told me made me close. I put his card in my back pocket and rolled up my window. The officer pointed me along where I parked alongside Roberts's car. The bowling ball-shaped hole in the windshield pointed inwards, like something was thrown through it from the outside. The jagged glass remains were painted red. A tow truck lifted the car onto its bed. The ambulances began to drive off, and soon I was alone along the hut. The last to leave was the officer I spoke to before. He stood along his driver's side door, met my gaze, and nodded slowly before getting in and driving off. Before I could collect my thoughts, my phone vibrated. Another text message came in which read, "An additional month of advance pay had been transferred into my bank account." Soon I got an email to confirm just that. I started to think I was going crazy now, either from lack of sleep or fright. My mind started racing. Could Robert have died from not following the rules? What made the hole in his car? I reluctantly grabbed my bag and headed inside the hut. Before I could sit down, the ham radio began going off. It was only a couple minutes after my shift started. "Hello," I answered, clearing my throat. "Glad to see you back. Such a shame about Robert. He was with us for 3 years, a woman answered. "I'm sure you got the bank statement sent to you." I nodded, like she could see that. "Good. Well, think of it as payment for seeing Robert go out like that. Just keep quiet and more rewards will be sent your way." The receiver clicked off. Great, I thought, having to keep quiet just because I'm getting paid off. I had to think about it. I had all night to wonder about Robert and what I could do with the money now. While I rhymed over the endless possibilities of what to buy, I refreshed myself on the rules of the night, which were neatly placed on the desk, ready for me. Number 1, do not investigate any ringing bells, no matter how close they sound, they aren't. Number 2, if bugs start landing on the hut's glass window, burn the candles that are under the desk till your shifts end. Number 3, if pebbles are thrown at the hut's glass, turn the light off and hide under the desk till the laughing stops. Number 4, if gravestones begin to appear and reappear, go outside and pour oil over them, oil located under the desk. Number 5, if a gravedigger comes, do not approach him, let him come to the window. He will stare at you for a few hours but will leave after. Do not go outside while he's here. Number 6. Do not venture out past the Great Angel Grave under any circumstance. Number 7. Do not answer anyone talking from the ham radio except for the initial call when you came in. Number 8. Lock the hut after each time you step outside. Number 9. Do not leave the bathroom for more than 10 minutes at a time. If you have to, come back, wait, then go back. Number 10. If at any point you return to the hut and see someone else sitting in the hut, get in your car and drive off. Before long, a couple hours passed by, and I was starting to feel the effects of only limited sleep from before. I sucked down 2 Red Bulls within those first few hours. Time seemed to stand still when the sun went down. The cemetery was swallowed by darkness, and the world went quiet. Soon, I was face to face with just the few graves I could see in front of me. I counted each to make sure I appeased rule number 4. While I struggled to stay awake, I was jolted up by the sound of the receiver from the radio going off. It hummed alive and struggled to catch a signal. I reactively went to grab it when I stopped myself short. Number 7. I read the list again. Sure enough, number 7. Do not answer anyone talking from the ham radio, except for the initial call when you came in. I held back and waited for the receiver to end. What seemed like an eternity, the receiver continued until a faint, raspy voice began to speak from within the static. "Hello, hello," the voice from the receiver called out. I sat nervously in front of the receiver. My watch read 10 p.m. "Hello," drawn out the voice came in, more masculine each time. Trying to distract myself, I counted the graves, 6, just like last time. Then the receiver went out, the static stopped. I let out my breathe, which I didn't even realize I was holding. I looked out into the cemetery, zoning out a bit when something caught my attention. Trying to focus on my faint reflection in the glass, it looked like something was behind me. I froze up, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I squinted harder, trying to focus on the black shape in the dull reflection. When I gathered enough courage, I swiftly turned around, bracing for the worst. Nothing. Again, I let out a sigh of relief. The receiver shot to life with ear-piercing static. "Hello!" the man's voice roared out. "Hello! Hello! Hello!" Each time the voice shrieked higher in pitch. "Hello! Hello!" sounding like a demented clown who sucked too much helium. My ears were ringing. I plugged them and shut my eyes tight, then silence. The receiver clicked off. I held tight for a few moments before I opened. I was alone. I scooted back from the radio and rested my head on the desk. Tears were bubbling in the corner of my eyes. Before I could wallow in fright, my bladder began to hurt when I realized I really needed to pee. This was something I was hoping I didn't have to do, but the 8 coffees all day and 2 quick Red Bulls weren't doing me any favors. I reluctantly sat up, zippered my hoodie, and braced myself to go outside. The porta potty was about 20 feet from the hut, right next to a massive oak tree with big spiderweb-looking branches full of thick leaves. As I stepped outside the hut, Rule 9 echoed in my head. 10 minutes I got. Don't forget to lock the door. I locked the door behind me and sped walked to the porta potty. I reached it in seconds, slamming the plastic door behind me, and frantically reached my zipper. Waiting to pee, I started hearing rustling outside. The porta potty was dark, not a light except for the moonlight peering through the hole on the corner roof. I started to pee, despite the rustling growing louder. 2 minutes since I started, plenty of time. I finished peeing and pushed the door open, 7 minutes to spare. I raced out and made my way towards the hut. I was stopped short when a ringing bell caught my ear. Ding! A bell went off in the darkness. I checked my watch, a little under 7 minutes to spare. I stopped and peered into the black void of the cemetery. The ding came again, only sounding closer. That dry lump in my throat was coming back. I felt an unseen force try to lull me into the darkness. The ding came once again. I took a step towards it. I stopped, listened. Ding! A bell rang towards my right. I could have sworn it was to my left a minute ago. Again, I felt the force pull me closer. It was comforting. Ding! The bell rang, this time straight ahead. I nearly toppled over a gravestone that was broken in half. It was old. Thick moss was growing on the side of it. I crouched down and felt the cold stone on my palm. I tried to make out the header. I squinted, shining my phone light onto the grave. Robert, it read. A sharp pain seized up my body, and my mind flashed back to Robert being wheeled out in a body bag. The bell rang again, towards my right, then again. towards my left, then again to the front, then to behind me, then above me. I frantically searched around, looking for the source. That's when it hit me. I wasn't supposed to leave for more than 10 minutes. I had been gone for 8 minutes. When I checked my phone, I didn't realize how far I had wandered from the porta potty. I raced back the way I came, slamming my knees into gravestones I swore were not there when I first came. My shin rang in pain, and I felt a warm trickle of blood race down my leg. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me through the darkness. The hut was in sight, its bright, luminous glow in a sea of darkness. I raced along, checking my phone from my pocket, and got 1 minute. Then, I crashed into another gravestone, this one a bit bigger. My phone sprang from my hand, towards the side into the darkness. My knees screamed in pain as I felt the electric hot pain surge through my body while I crashed into the grass. With a bolt of adrenaline, I leapt up and raced towards the hut. I had to have only seconds left. That's when I realized I left my phone. I stopped at the hut door, unlocked it, and looked back. I couldn't see it, but I know I dropped it. I couldn't take a chance. I went inside and saw the extent of my knee, a bright red gash right on my kneecap, my pants stained red. I sat at the desk and dressed my wound as much as I could. Checking my watch became an ingrained memory at that point. How could I have been so dumb? Why didn't I just check my watch? Cursing at my own stupidity, I was brought back to reality by a little clank against the glass. I froze in place. Did I hear what I just heard? Again, a clang, a pebble hit the glass. I dove for the lights, and before I could dive under the desk, I met the gaze of a figure in the cemetery. It stood in the darkness, its eyes glowing yellow. I stood frozen by this being, its eyes seeming to pulsate from within the darkness. Within a moment's flash, something smashed into the glass, my phone. My phone was stuck in the glass, half in my side, as sparks shot out from it. From within the darkness, a hellish shriek came. I dove under the desk as the earth thudded and vibrated around me. It sounded like a bear was prowling out there. Then the laughing started. The little girl's laugh came in waves. Then the ground would shake like an earthquake, feeling like the whole hut would come down. I sat in the fetal position, with my eyes shut. The girl's laugh became more sinister and less human while the ground erupted around me. When I peeked out, bright yellow lights pulsated from within the darkness of the cemetery. I dove back under for safety and waited. I waited and waited, eventually having to piss myself as the yellow lights and vibrating ground continued for hours. For what felt like an eternity, until day began to rise. My shift was nearing an end, but who was going to relieve my duty, I thought. As the sun shone higher, I gathered enough courage to come out from under the desk. My bloodied leg is stiff and sharp with pain. I let out a whelp and winced over. My phone lodged within the glass. I was unable to pry it out. An old silver Cadillac began to pull up the road, its windows tinted black. It raced along, dragging up clouds of dirt. I figured this must be the new morning guy. As I stepped out of the hood, took in the morning air, and noticed my bacterias were both slashed. Not having any spars, I had to go home. The Cadillac pulled up alongside me, and a pimply-faced teen came out. He was led to the hut without saying a word, or acknowledging me by a tall woman with bright red hair and big dark sunglasses, her skin as white as milk. She met my gaze and nodded slowly. Maybe she is the one who contacted me on the radio, I thought. Too exhausted to care, I gathered my things and limped towards my car. I could see the woman talking to the teen outside the hut. She was holding the laminated rules in her hand. My car painstakingly kicked to life while I carefully rode down the path on 2 flats. I got home, with nearly my rims destroyed, and changed the tires quickly. I took a long shower, cleaned my wounds, and crashed into bed. I awoke later in the afternoon, did my daily ritual, and prepared for my 3rd shift. My leg was sore and achy, so I wrapped it tight and took a couple of Advils. Before I left for my car, my phone began to ring. "Hello," I answered. Nothing. "Hello." Again I called. "You broke some rules, Henry, did you?" My mind raced back to later last night, all the horrific memories pouring back. I didn't? Or I thought I followed them. What now?" I screamed out. "Get to the cemetery," the woman calmly said. "I'll explain." With my bag already packed, I raced towards my car and frantically sped down the road. Night was already approaching, much quicker than usual. The streets were empty and the air hot. A murder of crows swarmed over my head like a massive school of fish. I had a sick feeling bubbling in my stomach. Let me tell you what happened on my third shift so far. I left my house after the call from the mysterious woman I knew I had messed up, who could follow all those rules while being scared half to death. I raced down to the cemetery. Already I could feel my stomach in my throat. The sky was dark for being this early, windy and cold. A storm was on the horizon. It was one of those days where the quiet thunder rolls in from the hills and crashes lightning in bright streaks across the sky. The cemetery gate was off its hinges, swaying back and forth from the strong winds. It clanked loudly against the iron, echoing through the field. I powered through, my leg throbbing with each slight movement. Down the narrow path, I hardly noticed the cemetery was empty. Not a single grave was in the lot, just a lot of dried, dead grass. Of all the crazy shit I've seen in the past few days, this was the least of my concerns. When I reached the hut, the classic Cadillac with dark windows was parked out front. The woman with red hair and milky white skin sat on the hood smoking a cigarette. Her dark glasses reflected the glow of her cigarette. The thunder began, roaring in sync. I pulled up alongside her, grabbed my bag, which had an empty water bottle in it this time. She met me halfway, flicking her cigarette into the grass. I approached her tentatively, while the butt of her cigarette with a bright red ember singed the dried grass at my feet. "Do you know why I'm upset with you?" she asked, adjusting her sunglasses, her hips swaying about. "Well, I guess it had to do with me not following the rules." A streak of silent lightning etched across the night sky. "Correct, Henry, and with disobedience comes repercussions," she snapped back. I could feel the lump in my throat again. Well, you never told me about all that crazy shit that was going on here. You have been paid handsomely, Henry. You did not follow the rules, and now payments must be returned, my dear. Her voice became more demanding. "Okay, fine, take back some of my payments, but you have some explaining to do," I nervously replied. "Not at this time, Henry. Do you hear that?" On cue, the thunder erupted. I winced as the deafening thunder bellowed. "That's for you, Henry. You've made it this far with your life. Robert can't say the least," she said with a crooked smile, while my nervous smile reflected in her glasses. She approached me slowly, grabbing something from her behind her back. I cautiously stepped backwards. Hey, stay away from me, lady." Treading backwards, I tripped over something hard. A gravestone popped up from behind me, and I hit the dirt. My knee rang out in pain. The wind howled, sending branches flying. The woman straddled me in a flash, her knee digging into my knee, which was now bleeding again, her wild red hair flailing in the wind. She revealed a steel blade from behind her back with an ornate red crystal handle. The blade, reflecting the moonlight, her wicked grin grew wider as she squeezed my wrist. I writhed and wriggled to get free, where she would then dig her knee deeper into my wound, sending red-hot pain surging through my body. Squeezing my hand, she put the blade to my fingers. "A payment, Henry, don't you think?" I screamed and grimaced in fear. With a few clean slices, feeling wet-hot, she sliced through 3 of my fingers, leaving my index finger and thumb. They dropped to the ground, curled up and bloodied. I let out a sickening wet screech, followed by a boom of thunder and lightning. "Get up," she said, licking the blood from the blade. "Your shift starts now." I stood up, dizzy and faint, and wrapped my hand tight within my shirt. I was losing blood quickly. The woman disappeared into her Cadillac and took off. A silent thunderbolt lit up the dark field. Instantly, I was surrounded by gravestones. I made my way into the hut, answered the ham radio. It was the woman. All she told me was to use the first aid kit under the desk, and that if I left, I would be killed before I could reach the gate. I poured alcohol over my cuts and wrapped it tight. My hand felt lighter. I wanted to leave at that moment, knowing whatever death I may face, whatever Robert faced before he left us, had to be something sinister. The rain never came, just low thundering and bright streaks of lightning. With each bolt of lightning, the cemetery lit up. Once there would be dozens of gravestones, next there would be 2, then none, and so on and so forth. I snapped back when I realized there was a rule about this. The thunder was getting louder with each passing lightning strike. It was close. I rummaged for the list and read through them again. Rule 4. If gravestones begin to appear and disappear, go outside and pour oil over them. oil located under the desk. There it was. Pour oil over gravestones if they begin to appear and disappear. I looked under the desk, and behind the first aid kit was a rusty old can filled to the brim with viscous black oil. I grabbed the tin with my good hand. The lightning crashed again as a single large tombstone appeared in inches from the glass of the hut. Nearly falling over, I let out a little whelp by its sight. I nervously walked out into the darkness, the cool winds blowing into my face. The gravestone must have been 8 feet tall. I was shocked by the warmth that was radiating from it. I shakily tipped the oil can over the gravestone, not knowing what to expect. The oil bubbled and oozed where it began to melt away the rock like acid. Soon the gravestone was a melted pile on the ground. A lightning bolt crashed quietly, illuminating the field, revealing the normal-looking cemetery. I raced back inside, not wanting to stay out past 10 minutes, and waited. With each bolt of lightning, the field lit up and revealed the same number of gravestones. I counted carefully each time. As the night went on, boredom began to seep in, and the pain in me was now a dull, throbbing ache. My lips were dry and cracked, and my head felt like needles were being jammed into it. While I rested in pain, trying to resist the urge to puke, a single lowly bee landed on the glass in front of me. I didn't recall ever seeing a bug out here. Puzzled, I stared at him as he roamed about the glass. Then another, one by one, bees landed on the glass. Hundreds upon hundreds enclosed the glass, darkening the inside of the hut, their vibrations growing louder. I read over the rules again. Rule 2. If bugs start landing on the hut's glass window, burn the candles that are under the desk till your shift ends. Before I could burn the first candle I had, a bee made its way through the crack in the glass, where my phone used to be lodged in. It buzzed around the room, bumping into the light fixture. I hadn't known what to do at this point. Grasping the candle in my good hand, more bees poured in. The buzzing grew louder. I dove back towards the door, covering myself in my hoodie while the bees flooded in. Now they were landing on me. I frantically tried to light the match with my hand, but with each swipe, I would drop the matchbook. I swatted them away desperately, each sting feeling like a hypodermic needle in my skin. Every inch of loose skin was getting stung. One lucky one stung my left eye. As I reached for the dropped matchbook, I shrieked at the white-hot pain searing and yanked the stinger from my eye. I couldn't see. With the matchbook in my mouth, I struck the match and heard it catch. I held the match to the candle as bees crawled all over me, waiting for the wick to catch. I covered my eyes with my hand, squinting to see if the candle took. When I saw the little orange flame light up, I opened the hut door and fell out into the cemetery, slamming it behind me. I waited by the door as the bees swarmed inside. My watch is counting down the minutes, no longer than 10 minutes out here. My legs were starting to get shaky as the minutes winded down. I could see yellow light faintly out in the distance with each lighting strike. The being was waiting. Sweat rolled down my brow as my final minute came then, back into the bee swarm. Not wanting to face the being, which I think killed Robert, I reached for the door, closed my eyes, and slowly walked in. The buzzing was deafening. I stood in the middle of the hut as the bees crawled over me, an occasional sting here or there. I waited what felt like a century till I noticed the buzzing was getting quieter. Soon, I gathered enough courage to open my eyes. There were hardly any bees left in the hut. I stood still again and waited a few more minutes till all I heard was quietness. Raindrops began pelting the glass. The bees were gone. I sat on the floor sobbing. My body was aching with stings, throbbing all over. I looked at my hand where my fingers were, feeling like I could still flex them, and noticed a bee was crawling into my open wound. I frantically reached to grab it, wailing as it dug in my skin. I couldn't get a hold of it as it disappeared within me. I sat there wide-eyed, sickened. My finger was dripping a stream of blood onto the floor while my jaw gaped open, tears racing down my face. I know what I saw. A bee was inside me. I could feel it slightly moving within me. I curled on the floor and cried, the candle burning bright next to me. I don't know when, but I must have passed out after that. Either blood loss or shock from the stings. I went out cold. I awoke to a bright sky, the sun blaring through the glass. The candle was nothing more than a burnt wick. My heart sank when I realized it may not have stayed lit for my whole shift. My head was spinning, my knee and hand covered in dried blood. My eye felt like I had a baseball-sized welt on it. I could barely see out of it. I stood up hazily and looked around. The cemetery was empty again. Waiting outside for me was the woman with red hair. She sauntered over and unlocked the door. She looked at my hand, winced as a bee bumbled past her, and motioned for me to get out. I sobbed as I walked towards my car. I could feel her presence watching me or something. I then drove to the hospital. I told them about the bee, but they didn't believe me. They asked what happened to my fingers. I made up some story of my fingers getting caught in a weightlifting machine that sliced them right off. They looked at me cautiously. Their caution turned to confusion when I also confessed that I got stung by a swarm of bees as I left the gym to rush to the hospital. While I sit here in the hospital bed, I know they are watching me. I can feel their presence around me when I'm walking about. The wounds where my fingers were ballooned to a massive size, I could occasionally feel a tickle or a vibration somewhere in my body. I wondered if my body was making a hive somewhere inside me. My finger wounds oozed a gluey white and green pus that the nurse changed hourly. It smelt horribly, and my skin was turning green. As I rested in bed, I got an email on my laptop from the woman. All it read was, "Tomorrow's shift, your last one, be there, or you will have another payment to owe." I half smiled and half sighed. I can't believe this is happening to me. I feel like I am losing my damn mind. I will keep you guys posted after my last shift tomorrow, if I make it out all right. Thank you guys for the support. As the hours before my final shift started, I first had to make my way out of the hospital. I waited till after the nurse came to change my hand bandage. She would be back again in an hour. The hand, or what was left of it, turned a greenish hue, and the tips of my finger stumps were blackened and continually oozed pus. Every once in a while, a slight vibration would go off in my body. My mind raced back to being in the midst of the bee swarm the other day. While I shakily tried to distract myself from the dull pain in my hand, I shuffled to the door, not trying to make too much noise. The cut on my knee was healing better, but still ached with larger movements. I tried to fight through the pain as I darted down the hall toward the emergency exit staircase. Luckily, I was on the 3rd floor. My knee was sore by the time I reached the bottom. Now was the hard part, getting through the busy lobby without anyone pointing out the frantic guy in a hospital gown with his ass out. I threw caution to the wind and raced through the lobby, pushing myself through the revolving doors, my gown nearly getting caught in between. The evening air was fresh on my face. A cool wind flowed up my gown and sent goosebumps along my skin. My car wasn't too far. All I had with me was my keys and my laptop. Fortunately, I kept a spare set of clothes in my trunk. My shift started in 25 minutes and the full moon was brighter than ever. I hurried to my car when I heard calls coming from behind me. A portly security guard was prancing towards me, calling out my name, while he clutched his pants as they slid down his waist side. I got into my car, shot him a glance, and peeled away towards the cemetery. My last sense of self was left behind in that hospital. I knew what I was getting into as I approached the cemetery's steel gate, or so I thought. I hardly noticed the rusty gate had completely fallen off its hinges and laid on the side covered in debris, probably from the storm the other night. Driving through the path, the gravestones began emerging from the darkness as nightfall commenced. The sun's burning flames disappeared behind the thick forest canopy. Soon, I was surrounded by darkness. A faint orange glow began radiating from the horizon as I made my way closer to the hut, the orange hue pulsing and radiating in size. I pulled up alongside the hut. No Cadillac in sight, no worker in the hut, empty and alone. I put on my spare shorts and shirt and tossed the gown in the back seat, taking with me my laptop and car keys to the hut. The orange hue was coming from deeper within the cemetery, at the bottom of a hill. While my stomach began to sink, I waited in the hut for the call on the ham radio. I waited 30 minutes with no call. Prior shifts, the radio would go off instantly as I came into the hut. While the orange hue grew stronger and the radio remained silent, my nerves began to spike. I watched out for gravestones, making sure to count any out of the ordinary, yet they remained stable. No bugs yet, no pebbles, no bells ringing. I didn't even have to pee yet. Eerily enough, it was going okay. While I stayed on high alert as the night went on, the ham radio began to buzz to life. I stared at it for a few moments as the receiver struggled to find a single. Now I was in a predicament. I hadn't answered the receiver once since I got here. I reread the rules again that were neatly placed on the desk for me. Number 7. Do not answer anyone talking on the ham radio except for the initial call when you come in. That's the problem. No call came on when I came in. Only now it was calling. I cursed to myself and the cold sweat began to bubble on my skin. Reluctantly, I answered the call. "Hope you are feeling better, Henry?" A woman quickly answered. "Glad to see you made it here. I'm going to need you to follow my instructions, as I will only be saying them once, okay?" I meekly cleared my throat. "Okay, go." "I'm sure you noticed the orange hue out in the distance. I'm going to need you to join us here." "But I'm not supposed to leave for more than 10 minutes, I snapped back, a slight grin across my face. She can't trick me that easily. Smart boy. Yet Henry, if you followed the rules more closely your first few days, you wouldn't be in this predicament. You have 10 minutes to get here, or we will come to you." The receiver clicked out. Again, I cursed myself. I instinctually slammed my bandaged hand onto the table in rage. White hot pain surged through my arm as I jolted up wide-eyed and teary. I rested my head on the table. Thoughts of my family flooded into my head. I probably wouldn't see them again. My bandaged hand hung limply to the side as trickles of blood drooled out. While I wept on the table, I hardly noticed a tiny bee crawling out from within my bandages and flew around the hut. I stared at the bee as it bumbled about. I gathered my things into a drawstring bag, lit a candle, and made my way through the darkness towards the orange hue, which was now humming. With all the strength I could muster, I stepped out into the blackness. Through the darkness of the cemetery, twigs cracked around me, rustling of leaves fluttered about. My nerves were through the roof as I stumbled through the darkness towards the lights. As I drew closer, the humming grew louder. The ground made a low hum. I made my way to the top of the hill, looking down towards the hill bottom. A large, crackling bonfire stood in the middle, surrounded by people holding hands in unison, their crimson-red gowns flowing past their feet. Atop their heads were golden, demonic-looking masks with 2 large spiked horns. Their chanting grew stronger while the flames surged. Off to the side, a Cadillac was parked next to an ornate, angelic statue. Atop the hood, a woman with fiery red hair sat cross-legged smoking a long cigarette. The fire roared in the middle of the chanteurs, burning now from fluorescent orange to bright hot yellow. With each chant, the flames seemed to dance and grow. I cautiously made my way down the hill, careful not to twist my ankle, and tumbled all the way down. As I clumsily got closer, the chanting stopped. The golden masks turned in unison towards me. The red woman began to clap, cheering as I reached the bottom. "I'm here. What do you want from me?" I cried out, the heat from the flames tingling my skin. The golden masked men removed their cloaks, each of their pale bodies bruised and scarred. The woman approached, towering over me, with her hair nearly down to her knees. She sucked in her cigarette as it curled up to an ash. "For you, Henry, we need you. Your essence is required for salvation." The woman spoke. The masked men silently began chanting to themselves again. Before I could speak, thick hands grabbed me by the shoulders and waist. The golden men appeared behind me, their bright masks reflecting the glow of the flames. I could barely let out a whelp as they dragged me closer to the fire. Their thick musk stung my nostrils. I looked back and the woman was lighting another cigarette. I dug my heels into the dirt, trying to escape their grips. The chanting grew louder. My screams were drowned out by the voices. The flames swayed in an orange and yellow ballet. As the heat began to singe my hair and clothes, I was thrust first into the flames, my life flashing before my eyes, before going dark. I awoke in the middle of the cemetery, beside a tall, ornate, angelic statue. She looked down on me with her hands open. A thick crack split down her skull. I coughed and coughed, smelling the burning ash on my skin, yet it was bare. I looked down and hardly realized my fingers were back. I touched and pulled and scratched. My fingers were back somehow. I got to my feet, realizing I was in the cemetery. It was early in the morning. I looked at my watch, which had stopped. A thin fog loomed in the cemetery, which seemed devoid of life, devoid of gravestones, I quickly noticed. I sat by the angel statue for what seemed like hours as the sun rose higher in the sky. The fog began to clear, and I was met with the open fields of the cemetery. It was way past my shift at this point. I gathered my things and began to walk out into the field. I must have walked for hours, yet the sun never moved. I clawed my way up hilltops, passing the angel statue again and again. Her head follows me with each movement. Mass confusion was setting in. Despite me walking in opposite directions of the statue, I always came back to her. I continued on. My legs were beginning to feel tired, yet the cut on my knee had completely vanished. I called for help, my voice echoing through the empty fields. Straining to get a response, my voice was rash and cracking. As far as I could see plains of dead grass, I had not seen the perimeter gate at all, which scared me. As I desperately made my way through the cemetery, a hut popped up in the distance. With a newfound surge of energy, I hobbled towards the old, so familiar hut. My car was nowhere to be seen. The hut looked clean. All was the same hut, the same oak tree where the porta-potty was, the same ham radio. I closed the door and sat at my familiar chair, soaking in the confusion and disbelief around me. My mind raced back to the shutters, to the flames, to the lights. I felt the pain and heat of the fire as I was thrown in, searing my skin, yet I came out fine. I sat for what felt like hours once more, the sun sitting high in the sky without a cloud to be seen. If I really squinted, I could make out a shape in the distance. Must be the angel statue, I thought, yet every so often it changed positions and got closer, with boredom crashing upon me. I started writing. My story has been hectic so far. At this point, the utter confusion is what's most concerning. I seem to be alone out here, but not like before. This place just feels like an empty void. Once in a while, I will catch something moving in my peripherals. I'll turn and look, and there will be nothing. A sound may catch my attention, but disappear as quickly as it comes. While I sat here typing my story out, the ham radio screeched to life. A voice spoke from it, first a woman, which sounded like the Red Woman but undulated into a man's voice. While the voice struggled to come in, I called out to it, begging for help. Finally, the voice came to me clearly. "Hello, Henry," the man spoke. "Yes, I'm here. Please, oh God, will you get me out of here?" "What the hell is going on?" I cried, tears racing down my face. "You have nothing to worry about, Henry. All your pain is gone," he said, his eerily calm voice raising the hairs on my skin. "For now, Henry, you are with us. Your morning shift is well underway. See you tonight." The receiver clicked off. I sat there with my receiver in my hand. My body felt limp. I cried, I cursed, I screamed, I prayed, but nothing came, and nothing happened. The day went on for eternity. Time seemed to stand still. So, back to writing I hope this makes it through to you guys. I don't know how long I'll be here, when my shift will end, or will it ever end. If it gets through, I hope someone out there can find me. Signing off for now. I'll continue to update if I can. Love you all. Goodbye for now. Sincerely, Henry. The story of Henry will be continued in another video. Like, comment, and subscribe to stay tuned for the next part in Henry's chilling tale. Thank you for dropping by the archives and listening to our ghastly stories. Don't forget to like, comment, and lastly subscribe. Until next time, archivists, I bid you all good night.